to introduce
So
three dinner party leftovers, as Juliette Myers calls them. I'm sure you already know who they are. Katie wasn't on the film. Were you in the pictures?
I was running with you.
Oh, right, you were running with them, right.
Oh, wow.
We were working 17 hours a day, not leaving the studio. And I was running, so we'd all go down to the park in Santa Monica and run in the Palisades.
Early in the morning, too. Only you could get me to wake up 6 a.m. or whatever.
Okay, so Diane and I were talking about this morning. I started working on the dinner party I started in 1974 was when I started making the first drawings. But I had been researching women's history from 1968. And this was at a time when the prevailing idea was that women had no history. This was before any women's studies classes, and then before gender studies, queer theory, anything. It was like kind of the dark ages. But anyway, which are unfortunately seem to be coming back. Anyway, I started working all alone, and I originally was going to do 25 women who were eating a lot on plates. I'd been studying China painting for 2 years in preparation too. And do you even know what China painting is? Okay. You don't learn China painting. You learn how to paint a baby rose, how to do a tulip or a flower or a leaf, because by the time I got involved in the study of China paint, it had become a hobbyist technique, even though it dates back. I mean, all the plates that came out of the royal factories in the 18th century, I mean, they're just unbelievable, the quality of the China paint. But there's a long story about what happened. Anyway, so I was studying China painting, trying to extract how you paint from a system that was how you paint a baby rose. And so then I started working in '74. I did the first drawings for the dinner party. And then I started painting the flat plates by myself. At a certain point, I wanted to figure out how to make the plates become dimensional. And I went back to UCLA where I had gotten my master's and talked to the ceramics teacher there and told him I was looking for a ceramics student who could help me. And he introduced me to Leonard Scuro, who was a graduate student, and there was then a huge schism between art and ceramics. Like I used to say when I was studying at UCLA, painting and sculpture, the ceramics studio was in the basement, and all painting and sculpture students walked past the ceramics studio, the sculpture studio, so not to be tainted by craft. So Leonard, because of that huge schism, he wanted to learn how to be an artist, not just a ceramicist. So he came to work with me in 1975, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he was the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Then Susan Hill read my first book, Through the Flower, and she wrote me a note. She was the head of needlework in the film. She wrote me a note asking, did I ever take assistance? And so by that time, I had decided that the plates belonged on a table. So I'd come up with this idea of a triangular table, and for a lot of reasons. But a long table requires a tablecloth or tablecloths. So now I have these plates, and they're going to go on these white expanses. No, that won't work. So I bought myself a Bernina embroidery machine to try and learn how to do embroidery. there used to be this joke in the studio when there were like 75 people at the Thursday night dinner. Remember that? Oh yes, Judy thought she was going to do China painting in the daytime, needle in the morning, needlework in the afternoon, and research at night. Remember that? Okay, so then Susan, I remember when she came, we talked about what she would do, and by then I was doing research for the floor, because I decided the table had to go on a floor that represented the contributions of all the hundreds of women that I had found, and also I had found that the thing about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps was just simply not true. Without support, you can't go anywhere, whether it's a convent or your family or your spouse or your friends. So I wanted to represent that. So I said, how about you do research? Well, she was shit at research. And then I said, I showed her my embroidery machine. Now, the thing I discovered in the dinner party is that even though I cannot sew or stitch, I have an unaccountable ability to design for needlework. So I asked, but I didn't know anything about it. I mean, I didn't know how to stitch. So I asked Susan, well, do you know anything about needlework? And she said, well, not really. Well, all my aunts and grandmothers, they all stitch. I said, fine, you'll be the head of needlework.
And Susan, you know, Susan's watching this from Maine.
Hi,
speaking.
Susan. Hey. Okay, then I used to run into this graduate student, art history graduate student, at all my openings in LA. And I ran into her. I knew she was a graduate student in art history. I can't remember how. Maybe you told me. Anyway, so I ran into her again, and I said, hi, Diane, what are you doing with yourself? And she said, not much. And I said, you want to help me with some research? She said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I've assembled 300 names for this project on women's history, and I want 3,000. And she said, no problem, 6 weeks.
6 weeks turned into 3 years.
Okay, well, it's actually turned in almost 50 years. Anyway, so then even though most of the people who worked in the dinner party were volunteers, there was a small paid staff. But Diane would not let me pay her. She used to say, if you don't hire me, you can't fire me. Okay, now you saw what a passionate young woman I was, right? I was like, one minute I hate you, the next minute like I love you, I'm like, So it's actually proven to work out pretty well.
It did.
Juliet,
On the other hand, I let her pay me. And guess what? She fired me.
wasn't for a long time.
Oh, 12 years later.
12 years
She
later.
let me stay 12 years. With pay.
But didn't I say in Beyond the Flower
Yeah.
that the worst mistake of my life was firing you?
It was a public mea culpa.
So there you go. Okay, so now Juliet is the one who coined the term the dinner party leftovers, and just like that sign that I made for her, that everybody thought demonstrated what a horrible person I was. I mean, they thought I made you write it, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that what they thought?
Yeah, everyone thought I had to write this big sign on the table. Don't talk to me. I'm working.
I'm working,
If I
right.
stop, Chicago will kill me. Judy wrote it. But yeah, everyone thought I was humiliated and punished. But actually, I did gain some humility.
Also focus, right?
I learned how to focus, which is
Yeah,
what I
right.
talked about in the first
Okay,
book.
so anyway,
Still
so
works.
again, people assume I coined the term as a derogatory term for the people who work at the dinner party, but it was actually Juliet who coined the term.
Well, we've decided we're no longer, we've reached the point we're not leftovers, we are dessert.
Okay, so I'm giving you dessert. You'll, I'm sure, enjoy hearing from them.
Thanks,
And
Judy.
somehow Katie didn't get into the chopped liver.
I'm chocolate.
You ran the Palisades.
So, you have any stories to tell, girls?
Yeah, I mean, we really want, y'all start thinking about questions, you know, really, anything. Well, we'll reveal almost anything, but think of some really juicy questions to ask us. But this is one of my favorite dinner party stories. And you have seen the studio and what it looked like on that screen, and how there was a loft above, and there was photography and needlework, and in the bottom was a huge space for the ceramic studio. And so you saw the space itself. And one day we were all working in that space, in different places in the space, and I heard someone in the needlework loft. You saw how large the frames were for doing the needlework? They had...
Well, they were the size,
Yeah,
these were, these
are runners.
yeah,
So,
they were
you know,
this size.
and in the film, it was very obvious how large those beautiful frames for needlework. Well, they had to have a 6-foot-long aluminum ruler, of course, for measuring things that big. And they were working in the needlework loft, but sometimes people would borrow that large ruler and they'd take it away. And someone yelled, "Does anyone know where's the large ruler?" And someone in the ceramic studio said, "Oh, Judy went to the post office."
I just have to interject something because I miss Katie. Katie moved from San Francisco to LA to work on the dinner party. And she worked a lot on the research, and she helped me with the research and the writing of the Heritage Floor entries. And Katie and I still, when I put together the first compendium of everybody on the floor for the dinner party book, it was too many words. So we had done index cards. That's how we did research, because it was really hard to find information about women. So like we'd have to read 5 books on William Herschel to find 5 sentences about Carolyn Herschel. So when there were too many words, so here we have these index cards all in handwriting. And Katie and I sat there with whiteout. And we whited out.
Instead of editing, we just did it that way. And it was, when our copy editing person heard about this, she was mortified. She said, "Do you know how valuable those cards were before you ruined them?"
Also, Katie went on to become an Emmy and Oscar-winning film editor.
Not winning, but
But close enough. Close enough.
Right.
So what questions might you have? This is your chance.
I could say one thing, but I came the last year.
Where's
So
Susan's thing?
I came,
Yeah, go on.
oh, anyway, I read the book Judy's Through the Flower. I saw Woman House, and I thought, if Judy Chicago ever does another project, I want to work on it. And so then I heard about the dinner party. I was teaching in San Francisco. I was teaching women's studies and women artists and all that. And I said, well, is there any way I came to LA and met with Diane. I said, is there any way that I can participate long distance until I can get my act together to move to LA? And she said, well, you can do research. And so then I met with Anna Zolda, who I hope is watching too. Anne was head of research, and I met with her in the research group in Santa Monica. And I said, okay, well, I can handle this. And they gave me, my first assignment was women in aviation. And at that time, I had developed a hideous fear of flying. So it was perfect because I studied all these women aviators, and then when I flew down to Los Angeles, to Santa Monica, I had no problem flying anymore. So, and then I eventually moved. I packed up, moved to Santa Monica, slept on a friend's couch, and went to the dinner party full time until it was finished. Yeah. And then I continued with our tour.
Yeah, questions?
So 2 questions. First off, all of these personalities, and we saw some of the conflicts,
Yes.
With that many personalities in that confined space, how was living with each other?
I was living with each other. Well, I should say that the studio was organized in a way that we really tried to keep out everybody's sort of personal lives in a lot of ways. The work, as you probably saw, me speaking, we really worked to the work, and the work was what was important, and we tried to keep out those kind of personal conversations, except for those Thursday night meetings, where that, those kinds of issues started to come up. But it was really it was very much of a work environment, and which was incredibly important because, we were making a work of art, and it was not about, although, those period of times in the 70s were, it was all exciting, in terms of, discovering women's history, consciousness raising groups, those early years of feminism. But the studio wasn't really organized for that. We were really organized to do the work. So, and that, I think, is what made it, how people could work with each other. Yeah.
But in addition, and you said consciousness raising, and I studied that, and I was trained by people who had been doing that. And so in terms of dealing with people's issues that were personal or the personality conflicts, and trying to, again, keep the work in front of us, but we supported each other through we did have consciousness raising, sessions. So groups would come together, and women who wanted to have that experience, to have conscious raising, we did that together. So that was a good thing. It was learning. All of it was about learning, from the very, very personal to the professional.
I mean, for me, it was the best working environment I had ever been in at that point in my life. And it just was an inspiration to know that you could focus, concentrate, be respected, be supported, and produce something incredible. And Judy, of course.
Yeah, we had a great teacher.
We had a great teacher, mentor.
Role model of how you get,
How to work.
how to work as an artist and what it takes to be an artist. And it takes that concentrated, period of time and working, and not, yap. Except
Julie and I would get into trouble sometimes.
The proof is that Judy's absolutely the greatest teacher I've ever had, because she expected more of me than I thought I could deliver. And I think the mark of a great teacher is, kicking you in the pants. And
Recognizing
and believing that
Yeah.
one can do more. And I certainly did think I, couldn't do things that I ended up doing. And all that focus and everything, truly makes me the person who sits in this chair today. So, really.
I'm not even sure how to ask this question, so maybe I can start it and you can figure out what I'm asking. Obviously, the amount of research that you did even before going into this, at a time before the internet and all of that, how did you even know what to look for to begin?
Okay, so I was a graduate student in art history. I used the UCLA Research Library.
Yeah.
And I just started looking at first for W for women. It's like, okay. And then Judy had already amassed, 300 odd names. It was, although a library is cataloged, it was not straightforward. One of the first books that I found was a 5-volume book written in 1803 by a woman historian named Mary Hayes. Mary Hayes was influenced by Mary Wollstonecraft, and she did a history of women there's something like 1,000 women listed in these 5 volumes. 1803. When I checked that out, so they were in their original early 19th century, leather, leather volumes. And when I checked them out in the 1970s, the works had not, those books had not been checked out until something like 1907 or 1908. So I was the first person to have checked them out in essentially 70 odd years. And, we just kept finding things like that, but you had to look extremely carefully for them to find that information, and we just kept digging and digging. But the Mary Hayes books, sort of, in a sense, set us on that, another path. So I'd find a name, and then we try and find, could we find them in another book? Could we find them, in the card catalog, the good old-fashioned card catalogs that you started to pull out? And, and it built and built and built on that.
Do you still have that research that you did?
A lot of that archival material is at the Schlesinger Library. I actually have my own set now of the Mary Hayes books that were bought for me as a present about 12 years ago, found in Ireland. I had been trying to find a set for years and years. So, you just have to keep looking.
If anybody is interested in looking, we donated the entire dinner party.
Yes.
We donated the entire dinner party library to UNM Valencia. And there's a whole, it started out as 1,000 books, and there are now 2,100 books in the Through the Flower Library by and about women that are used all the time in interlibrary loans.
Mm-hmm. We also have a small library here around the corner that anybody can come in and, use anytime. Yeah.
Interested in, you referenced it in the movie, the lack of funding or tough times you had. I'm kind of curious about the intersection of art and money.
No, there's money, and then there's art.
There's men's art and there's women's art.
You can't raise money.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
And so do you feel sometimes you took money from places that you normally wouldn't? Or you didn't care where it came from?
No, that's absolutely not right, because, I did a lot of the fundraising. And we had an opportunity to take money from the Playboy Foundation, for example, and we, voted and decided not to, even though it would have been a significant amount. So, we had 2 NEA grants. We had a Ford Foundation grant.
That was until the end.
No, we got the check from the Ford Foundation the night of the opening. A $10,000 check.
So tell how we raised money.
We mostly raised money. Judy would lecture, and she would sell postcards and posters, and all of the money that she made over the period of time we were working all went back into her art. That's the way it was funded. We also, I started lecturing, and as I say, we nickeled and dimed it, and literally on $5 and $10 donations. That was the bulk, with a few, $1,000 donations, but very few. And it was, it was certainly not. It was not easy.
Tell the story about how Through the Flower happened.
Yeah, so Through the Flower, and we're in the Through the Flower art space. Judy and I formed that organization, that company, nonprofit, in 1977, which is how long Through the Flower has been operating. And it was...
Tell how it happened.
Yeah, no, I'm just starting to tell you. This is why she's my partner. This is why she's my partner.
That sums up 45 years.
Exactly. She, of course, could tell it, but we'd actually gotten an NEA grant, which was a matching grant, and we had already, Henry Hopkins, who is the director of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, had already committed to showing to showing the dinner party. And they could not deal with $5 donations and $10 donations. They were major institutions. And Henry came into the studio and said, you have to do something about this. We can't process these kinds of checks. This is absolutely crazy. And encouraged us, well, basically said to us, you have to start your own nonprofit. And we knew nothing about nonprofits. We knew nothing about starting nonprofits. But that is how Through the Flower happened. And then Through the Flower went on, so, we matched the grant, and then Through the Flower went on to be the, supporting, overall institution then where, to help travel the show. So that, and then has gone on to doing, supporting other works of Judy's. But none of it was easy. I mean, it was, all about going out and, trying to raise the funds on nickel and diming it. Yeah.
I'd like to hear, at the end you said, it was closed. How long was the show in storage? Did it travel? And then how it ended up in Brooklyn?
Okay, well, I can speak to most of that. So at the end of yes, it went into storage, okay? The unbelievable, as you saw in the film, it was an unbelievably successful show. The most successful show the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art had at that time. And the show went into storage.
Can I
And
just
the
say
artist
that
went into shop. Diane Gallen went on the road.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was gonna say the museum named their cash register Judy.
Yes, the museum had to buy a new cash register for all of the merchandise that they were selling, which they nicknamed Judy. Because, ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. But what started to happen was that, there was a lot of press around the dinner party, and what started to happen is that we were getting, inundated, literally, with people's, is it coming to our city? Where's it traveling? What's it doing? Where's it going? And of course, it was going, going essentially nowhere. And indeed, Judy went into shock, and I said, fuck this shit. I'm not gonna let what I've worked on for all of these years to sit in crates. And so I started responding to some of the people who were writing. And the first real serious person was Mary Ross Taylor in Houston, who invited me to come and speak. And we just started, figuring out how we could build, a support network to bring the show to Houston. And exactly a year after it opened in San Francisco, the show opened in Houston at the University of Houston at Clear Lake City, basically an alternative environment. It opened in the, wasn't it in the gymnasium, which we converted, which, became an art space. And from there, basically a schedule got built. So while we were doing, working on Houston, I was then traveling to Boston. I was then working, Doubleday, who was the publisher of Judy's autobiography, gave me an office at Doubleday to work out of, to try and get the show to, somewhere in New York, and with a group of what I call incredibly wealthy, influential women at the time, worked with them to try and figure out how to get it to an institution in New York. So I'm doing all of this while, I'm constantly building where it's going next. And those women in New York essentially raised the funds and went to the Brooklyn Museum and said, will you show it? And we had a very supportive museum director, Michael Botwinick, who, but it was funded by outside funding, as happened in those times, so that we came to them with a show with the funding.
Which wasn't common then, but now
Yeah.
it's very common.
Yeah,
One thing especially with the person who asks about money, not everybody understands that when an artist shows in museums, and the museum makes all kinds of money, the artist doesn't get it. exhibitions, artists don't get royalties.
Mhm.
And even when work is sold, resold for a gazillion dollars, the artist sees nothing. The art world is a really tough place.
Yeah.
What were their arguments for not bringing it in? I mean,
Oh, well, I mean, the big argument for not showing the work was, oh, we don't have the space, we don't have the time, we don't have the scheduling, we don't have this, you know, it's like every excuse in the world. And
they show dinosaurs.
they do show dinosaurs. This, however, was not a
Sorry.
dinosaur. This was a work of art that was about feminism. They might have shown a dinosaur, but they weren't about to show this. And then, you know, and you know, everywhere we went, you know, we built a community, built a support community.
Grassroots.
And, you know, it was very much grassroots, and you know, we had you know, it was tough. You know, it had a mixture of grassroots support, of women going to their museums and saying, we need to show it. And the exhibition schedule just grew from that. And so the show was, you know, it went from, you know, Houston to Boston to Brooklyn to Cleveland to Chicago to Atlanta, and then across Canada to Montreal, Toronto, Calgary. I'm probably leaving something out. It crossed over the Atlantic to Edinburgh, London, Frankfurt, crossed again to Australia. Then it remained in crates for quite a number of years when it came back out again at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. And we had an incredibly supportive, you know, it's really the story about how women can come together. It's also the story of how one woman can make a difference. And the woman who made the difference in terms of its personal, you know, in terms of its housing in Brooklyn was Elizabeth Sackler, who came, you know, who was really supportive of Judy's work.
The good Sackler.
The good Sackler, she was a good Sackler.
She had sold it.
And, you know, who, you know, essentially made it happen in Brooklyn. And which is where the work is now, and I encourage you all to take a trip.
Might you have a goal or a hope of showing the exhibit somewhere else, some other museum that maybe didn't exist before?
Not really. I'm very happy for it to be in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
believe me.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful space.
Yeah, it's sort of hard to move.
It's a lot easier.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier for people, to go there.
Yeah.
Right.
How long would that process take to take it down,
Oh, we,
to put, you know?
Oh, when we moved it, it would take, the installation took about 2.5 weeks or so. Everything pulls apart. We had a wonderful man, Ken Gilliam, who really designed, who was an industrial designer who designed the systems that would allow us to travel the show. And to break it down, the floor all breaks down into, you know, smaller components. It gets regrouted, you know, when it traveled. And the tables all come apart. You know, everything came apart. It was brilliantly designed. We traveled also to some of the places with our own lighting system. So it was, you know, generally about 2.5 weeks and about 1.5 weeks for the breakdown. And we had our own, so it was me, Susan Hill, and Peter Bunzik were the installation crew that went with it, traveled with it.
but it is permanently housed. I know you have a second question. So I haven't, you know, I noticed that. But it's permanently housed in Brooklyn. I mean, that is forever. And so
That was
it
a
is right to
major-
make a pilgrimage.
Major conference.
Yeah, and the wing is specially designed for the dinner party. So it really is in place, and it is much safer to not travel at the fragility of everything, the plates, the runners, the goblets, the flatware. So it's there and it's waiting for you if you haven't been. So, and your second question?
So, the other question is, any regrets in leaving any names out, or any that you would like to add, because it's been almost 50 years?
Wow.
Well, certainly looking back, you know, I mean, there's been significant research done. And we did, you know, we had no access to that. And a lot of people have, you know, used the dinner party as the beginnings of their research. Because, you know, here we're presenting over 1,000 names of women in history. And I like to think that we, you know, Judy kick-started some of the research that was done. You know, I personally wouldn't change anything that we did. You know, it's a symbolic history. You know, it's a symbolic history of women in Western civilization. It's not the history of the world. It's not, you know, and that wasn't intended to be. It was intended to be essentially like a touchstone, so that each one of these women were very similar to some man in that period of time. And so, you know, we have rulers, we have artists, we have writers. So personally, I wouldn't change anything. Yeah.
Do any of you have a personal story of being a fly on the wall at an opening where you heard something and it just stuck in your head?
I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, we were so giddy and happy that we weren't eavesdropping. But I think that's what, you know, what Johanna did was like following people through, and Anna Zolda was one of the people. But she got the reactions and the comments following people going around the table, and also opening night, and, you know, just feedback from people coming out. But I just remember it being so much fun, and we were so relieved and ecstatic that I don't think I talked to anybody except our team. Yeah. I did remember one thing though, this is at the studio. Towards the end, when we were almost finished with it, First Lady Joan Mondale visited the studio. She was a patroness, supporter of the arts, and she made a special. I remember getting the call from the Secret Service one morning, and they came and scoped out the place. And she came and had a little tour of the studio.
Yeah, but what I remember about that is that I was on the lawn, and the Secret Service got hysterical that I was above the First Lady.
You came downstairs, though.
I had to come downstairs. I was
Yeah.
not allowed to be, you know, which was so contrary to our egalitarian ethos.
Yeah, she was the wife of the vice president at the time, and it took me nearly 9 months of work in Washington D.C. to get her to come to the studio.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. I said First Lady. She was second lady.
She was the second lady,
Right, right.
in the days when we had second ladies and not gentlemen.
I think Anna Solda's sister has a question. And so,
So I have a question for you, Judy. In the video, they talked about looking at the plates and seeing the influence of Georgia O'Keeffe.
The what?
The influence of Georgia O'Keeffe. So I would like to hear about, you know, your studying Georgia O'Keeffe and how she influenced you in the making of the plates. And
Well, for centuries, first women couldn't really get training in the arts. They couldn't get education. But if they managed to become an artist, they had to, if they had any personal subject matter, they had to kind of find a way to insert it into the prevailing art historical tradition. Now, if any of you know who Artemisia Gentileschi is, she's one of the women represented on the table. She personally was raped by the man who was hired by her father to teach her, train her. And more recent scholarship has made it clear that if you examine her work, her paintings of Judith beheading Holofernes, and the male artists, her colleagues, peers, in their painting, Judith is kind of standing there like this. In Artemisia's, it's Judith who's like, his head. So it was a way for her, that's a pretty good demonstration of how women artists had to use prevailing themes. With abstraction and surrealism. For the first time, women were able to invent their own forms to convey their own experience. And that's when we begin to see female-centered art. And O'Keeffe, although there are a lot of other women from that period who have not received the same level of renown or fame or success, for example, Agnes Pelton, who has only recently been discovered. Her paintings, I mean, O'Keeffe kind of denied it, but I don't care what O'Keeffe said. I'm looking at her paintings, right? And her paintings are embodied images with central core that could only have been painted by somebody whose body is organized around the central core. And in fact, you see, if you study women's history, art history, particularly in contemporary times, you see a lot of women organizing space that way.
Should we take one more question? And then, yeah,
In the film, when you're installing the dinner party, and I think it's the Georgia O'Keeffe actually plate, had a crack, or it didn't
that
have
is
a
for
crack. So what was your solution in that situation? That was, pedal to the metal there. And were there other incidents in the installations where things like that occurred?
yeah, that was in the process of making it. The plates were all perfect that, were in the final,
Okay.
in the final exhibit. And,
So did that plate have to be remade?
many times did plates get remade, many times, which is why you're, just have a look at the plates that are here, the various test plates. A lot of them got to a certain point, and then Judy would open up the kiln. She was so excited, and she wouldn't wait till it completely cooled down. We'd hear screaming. Yeah, I mean, things got made over and over and over again. Stitching got taken out over and over and over again. And, work had to be of a particular quality. Yeah.
Now, speaking of stitching, do you want to read some of what Susan Hill
Yeah,
wrote?
just
I
in
asked
the-
Susan, she couldn't be here, she's in Maine,
Not traveling. Yeah.
shoveling snow.
Yes.
I said, is there anything you'd like to share?
Well, I'll say, this week I asked my grandmother's great-great-granddaughter Caroline, born early in the 21st century, who studied the dinner party in her high school art course, her views about it and changes for women. Carolyn said, the dinner party inspires and educates. The progress for women it has helped generate is monumental. It is unique and powerful, distinguished from other influential artworks in its use of traditionally female mediums, validating the skill required and the beauty of these feminine art forms. We need powerful women to be included as notable figures in their own right, as warranted by their accomplishments rather than their gender being the commonality. We're not done. Let's celebrate our progress and never lose sight of the goals. That's a good place to end.